Yes, you are now listening to the sounds of Sports Reports as Ordered. And those sounds are brought to you by me. And of course, I'm not alone because I got with me the world famous, the world renowned, cool, calm, and collected. Born in Texas, raised in Virginia, representing everything New Jerusalem. Ladies and gentlemen, he goes by the name of Mr. Logic. And then, of course, down here in the Alamo, I said it was me. It's your unorthodox statistician going left so much you thought I was southpaw. Watch out, Tank Davis. Oh, never mind. He running anyway. I am 2-5. Tonight, preview season continues. Big 12, and we got the SEC coming to you on Friday. So let's do this the right way. We are everywhere you get your podcast. We are everywhere streaming. Like, review, subscribe, rate, share, do all the free things. Do all the good things. Liquid Death's on me. Mr. Logical. So the Big 12, has some narrative problems. It has some location problems because as we look around, college football has these small towns, Alabama, Tuscaloosa, Oklahoma, and Norman. But when you get to the Big 12, it gets real barren. You got Manhattan, Kansas, so cool that they got to call it the Little Apple. You got Lawrence, Kansas. You got Waco, Texas, Lubbock, Texas. Stillwater, Oklahoma, and even Colorado. They don't play in Denver. They play in Boulder. So, real quick question for you. Do you think that lack of big city, besides, I guess, UCF in Orlando and Arizona State just outside of Phoenix, do you think that plays a role in the perception of the Big 12?
Not really, because in those small towns, you can pretty much lock in the entire community being involved in the team. If you think about Happy Valley, that's not a very large city in Pennsylvania for the Big Ten. Ann Arbor, 100,000 people come see the Wolverines play. I think those smaller towns, I believe there's more connectivity to the team in the town. So I don't think it hurts them at all. It might hurt them potentially in recruiting, but we're going to talk about Texas Tech and that Western Texas oil money. They're willing to outbid whomever. So Lubbock may be a small town, but the bank accounts are huge, and their supporters and their boosters have big bank accounts. So that can make your town look like the biggest city in the world if you got enough money flooded into it. Vegas is not that big of a city, but when you go there, it looks like it's a grand city. Depends how much money you can flood into it.
Well, I think they have a branding problem too, because, if you can't have the city, you got to have the brand. So, we talked about it, Alabama, Oklahoma, the ACC even has Florida State, Miami, Clemson, North Carolina's recognized, Big Ten, Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, so on and so forth. The Big
those
12
are blue bloods. They have
right.
That.
That's what I'm saying. The Big 12 doesn't necessarily have a school that I guess you can look at that's on that stature. When you say the name, it just resonates and rings bells. But, last year, the Big 12, to me, I know people love the SEC. I know people love the Big 10. But for me, the Big 12 is the best conference because they got the competition. We don't watch the NFL to see people go 17-0, for example. You like the week variety and who can win. So like last year, for example, right? We ended up with Iowa State and Arizona State in the Big 12 title game. But going into that last 2 weeks of the season, Colorado and BYU had a chance to get there as well. They both finished with 2 losses. Then you had Baylor, TCU, and Texas Tech, a game, that they were a game behind them. So that's 6 out of your 16 teams. That Hail Mary against Colorado cost Baylor just about everything. And then you had K-State and West Virginia, a game behind them. So you had 8 out of your 16 teams within a game or two of reaching the title game. I don't know if we're going to see that this year, But there's other things going on in the Big 12. Jake Retzlaff, the BY Jew as they call him.
Yeah.
Now he's over at Tulane because he couldn't keep it in his pants. I call that the Brandon Davies rule.
Yeah.
Mike Gundy, first losing year in 18 years, and Ollie Gordon's gone now. So I don't know. Scott Frost, national title winning coach back at UCF. What I'm saying? If UCF make another run, 5-22, Scott Frost in one score games at Nebraska. Colorado this season, they're going to be like a box of chocolates. Week to week, you just don't know what you're going to get. And then, of course, it's the return of the prodigal son. Rich Rodriguez back at West Virginia, 60-26 career record. And if we remember his last game at West Virginia, he lost the backyard brawl to Pitt. If they win that game, they would have been playing Ohio State for the national title that year. So, he's back home. So let's jump right into it, Mr. Logical. What you looking for in the Big 12 this year? Who is your champion and how do we get there?
The thing I'm looking for the most is teams that are playing out west to carry the prime time hours of college football. We talked about it with Cal and Stanford playing their games on the East, being an ACC. Maybe because they felt like they couldn't get a lot of West Coast time. I think Arizona State, BYU, I'm a little down on Colorado because I just don't feel like they have the horses or mainly the muscle to keep up with and make up for what they lost with Shador and Travis and LeJounte and Horn and just all the other pieces that they lost in the NFL draft. I like Kansas State. I like teams that return their quarterback. Oklahoma State always seems to be a good team. I think they can recruit Oklahoma and Texas well. I like like you said, like it's more parity. Obviously, I like Utah. It's one of my favorite states in the union. I think they always are a team that just retool. They don't have down gears. They keep continuity with Kyle Whittingham. He keeps the staff. He keeps people together. They have a great recruiting pipeline between Florida, Texas, and the California JUCO route. So I think they just constantly bring in talent. They got a couple of guys from down south that play wide receiver. I like what a lot of these teams are doing. I like that it's not flashy. I like that it's not all just NIL money. I know, like I said, Texas Tech, they've been talking about throwing a lot of NIL money at players, but I think that Texas Tech's competition is other schools in Texas. I don't think they look at winning the Big 12 as the creme de la creme of their season. I think they look at, did we out recruit the other Texas schools? Did we win the state of Texas? Because people have been talking about for years. Anybody you meet from Texas, they will say something like, listen, Texas, we could be our own country. We could be our own country. So I think winning Texas is more important for Texas Tech. Subsequently, having enough talent, you should be able to, translate that to winning the Big 12. So I think they're probably like the only school that's really flooded with NIL money. Houston, for some reason, always seems to lack the talent. I'm like, you're in East Texas, big city, you should be able to get the same talent.
Fifth biggest city in the country to be exact. So I don't know what's going on there. And they haven't, necessarily been a national player since the days of Andre Ware. And that was, back when I was still in elementary school.
They can recruit Louisiana, Arkansas, and East Texas and fill the team. Like literally, you don't even need to fly. Just get a van, couple of coaches in it, have them drive East Texas, in Arkansas, down to Louisiana, back down to Houston. Hey man, we got 83 guys. Just in that bunch right there, you can get 83 players.
And and that's
within
crazy.
Reason, obviously.
And that's crazy because when you look at the basketball team, they just played for the national title this year. They made a Final Four about 4 or 5 years ago. In the last 5 years, they've won more games than any other team in college basketball. So I would have to imagine that it's just a lack of focus and a lack of investment, is what it comes down
continuity. Like I said, we talked about Utah. Whittingham's been there for what? If I had to guess, 24
years.
Seasons.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So because I know he was definitely there with the same coaching style, the same tenacity when I got to Utah in 2006. He was coaching that way, So it's like,
Right.
so that's just a lot of time spent with an organization. I like Colorado's coaching staff. Obviously, I'm a big Dion fan. I like that he keeps bringing in NFL guys. I mean, Hall of Fame guys to coach. It's just that you got to bring in some Hall of Fame recruiters too. Like you got to, like I get that you can get Warren Sapp to teach, some defensive tackles his moves, but you also would probably want to recruit a guy like Warren Sapp, not just a guy that you think Warren Sapp can just teach to be good. You want a guy that can just come in and be dominant, and this Hall of Fame tutelage will just advance that his ability.
Yeah, so I got a couple of coaches that I'm looking at the hot seat for. I'm looking over at Arizona, Brent Brennan. So it's one of those things, right? He came from San Jose State. It was a last minute hire after Jed Fish surprisingly went to Washington. You look back at it, he was 34-48 at San Jose State. Now, San Jose State has not been the beacon of success when it comes to college football. So I don't want to necessarily look at the overall record to make a judgment, but I got my guy, from Navy, Ken Nia Matualu, went out there last year and won some games. So it makes you wonder. I look at Scott Satterfield, over at Cincinnati. I wonder if I'm going to induct him into my Tubby Smith club. He was great at Appalachian State. Came in Louisville year one with the players that were there, looked great. And ever since then, it's been a whole ball of mid.
Yeah.
So I got him on the hot seat. If Cincinnati doesn't make a bowl game this year, he's out of there. And then the surprising one, not necessarily surprising, but you might not expect me to say this, but I'm going with Joey McGuire out of Texas Tech, because now that Texas Tech is putting all this money, you got to get the results now. It's one thing to have the talent. He came over from Baylor with high expectation. He was supposed to be the next coach, that next hot name or whatever the case may be. He's done well at Texas Tech, so I don't want to make it sound like he's not a good coach. But he reminds me a lot of Jeff Bowden, Bobby Bowden's son at Florida State, where it was like, hey, we got more talent than everybody. Just throw jump balls and we should win. Not that he plays that style, but it's more like, hey, we got these players. We got the talent. We're in Texas. We're going to beat you. And then they don't. So now that you got all this money going into the transfer portal, got to see some results.
Yeah, and the money it's not even subtle. Like they have a general manager. He came out and said it. Like, listen, if a school is offering a guy 300,000 to 400,000, we're offering 700,000 to 800,000. I'm paraphrasing, but that was essentially what he said. He was like, whatever they're offering, we're going to offer more to ensure that we get this guy. And like I said, it's East Texas. It's a great program, popular program. Patrick Mahomes' NFL success is probably helping drive the recruiting needle. Um, but yeah, it has to translate into wins. And you talked about the Hail Mary, Colorado and Baylor, or even the fumble at the goal line. Like little things like that when you're in a competitive league can really change it. Georgia, and when we get to the SEC, Georgia, Bama, LSU, some of these schools, they might just basically bank themselves 9 wins just off looking at the schedule, looking at the talent deficit that other teams have when they walk to their building. They could probably knock themselves, 9 wins. A lot of these other schools, it's hey, best case scenario, we're 9-3, 10-2. Worst case, we're 7-5, and 7-5, you're missing out on championship opportunities. We saw Arizona State fourth down, they stop Texas, they move on. So it's like little things like that they can't really afford to do, but like those kind of mistakes. But I felt like Arizona State, that game against Texas, Scatterboo was playing like a man amongst boys. They should have won it. I don't like zone coverage in college football. Somebody always messes up. I would just go man with safety help over top. Just live and die with that. If the guy beats his guy guarding him and the safety, that's fine. But you can't let a guy run right up the seam because your whole safety drops down to take off the dig route and let the dagger route run right by him. So for a
Yeah,
touchdown on fourth down.
so taking it from the top, alphabetical style, we got Arizona, who I was just talking about a little bit ago. So this is what scares me about Arizona. I've seen a lot of people picking them to finish in last. I don't have them quite last. I got them about fourth from last. But as I was looking at it, something that scared me, we were talking about the Detroit Lions and talking about that continuity of, hey, they lost both coordinators, but, the engine is there. Dan Campbell, the motivator, and the guys that they brought up, were in the system. Whereas Arizona, on the other hand, it was year one. They don't have one coordinator coming back to include special teams off of a team that went 4-8. So that's what tells me that the coach is in trouble because drastic times call for drastic measures. Ted McMillan is gone, and I hope that Noah Fertitta doesn't take him for granted because if you look at Noah Fertitta last year, he went 18 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, didn't, get to 3,000 yards passing. The year prior, 25 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. So, okay, I'll chalk that up to a new system. Maybe you're getting used to a new system. So that's your year to get engaged in that system, and maybe you look better this year. But this was the thing that stood out to me about those numbers. He had 97 more passing attempts the year before, but only 189 more yards in those 97 attempts. So that's where I'm kind of looking at it like, okay, now I gave you
That
the
could be
system
part of the
back.
system because it's like the year previous, he probably knew I could look this route off. This route's going to be open, or it maybe just a little bit more simple. Maybe this new system was too complex, too many checks, too many option routes, things of that nature. There's probably a lot of levels to it, but you could lean on the success that he had as a younger quarterback going 25-6, that you're more likely going to get that kind of production going forward. But like you said, losing all your coordinators, that's either a sign that the writing's on the wall for the coach or he was not a good person to lead them. Because at 4-8, I would think your pride would make you want to come back and remedy that. I mean, you're in a good place. Tucson, Arizona is a great city, great state. So it's not like you're in a bad location. I mean, granted, it's hot, but you're in a good location. You're going to be able to scout talent. You're probably going to get first dibs at the best high school recruits and JUCO recruits in Arizona. And that general region, Southern California is going
right
to
next
be
door, yeah.
California right there. So I just feel like at 4-8, you would probably want to come back, but it could be something like you said with the coach being on the hot seat. Like, hey, maybe he wasn't that good to work for or work with.
Yeah, and so the other thing, because of course, you got to look at the schedule and everything. So, they get 2 freebies potentially right out the gate. They get Hawaii at home, and they got Weber State coming in.
Listen,
saying
don't sleep on the Wildcats.
don't
Don't
sleep
sleep
on
on
Weber
Ivory,
State.
Utah.
What
All
I'm
right.
saying? Yeah, you get hit with that purple magic, and
Yeah, it happens.
but then it starts to get a little bleak. You got K-State coming in, even though it's a Friday night. We've seen crazy things happen on Friday nights, especially in the Big 12. K-State went to Oklahoma State one year on a Friday night riding high and got upset. So it could happen, but it ain't going to happen. Then they get their bye week, go to Iowa State, so Ames, Iowa. But the rest of their schedule looks pretty manageable, until you get to the end of the season. You get Baylor and at Arizona State back to back. But their schedule looks pretty manageable for the most part. So if they could just hang tough with Kansas State, I would say, just hang tough, play them tough. You're at home, maybe jump out to an early lead, get the crowd into it even. But just be competitive, and maybe that could springboard you for the rest of the season because they have talent. They just got to put it together. So then you got the other Arizona team up in Tempe, Arizona State, the reigning defending champions of the Big 12. They were my surprise team last year. But I wasn't talking about they were going to win the Big 12. I was like, hey, they're going to win 8 games. They said, all right, ante up. So you were talking about Cam Scatterboo. He's gone now, but all the hype now is on Sam Levitt, the quarterback. So last year he came out of nowhere, freshman, redshirt freshman. So there were some ups and downs early in the season. But then Arizona State had that Washington Commander thing going on where, they went 5-1 in the one-score games. They were able to pull it out. So it showed me the coach that Dillingham is, because when I look at the year before, they had an awful season, but part of that was a lot of offensive line injury to the point where they had defensive linemen that had to play offensive linemen because they had no depth. So now that they have a full team on their hands, they showed you what they were capable of. And you brought up the Texas playoff game. Their receiver, Jordan Tyson, NFL guy, he wasn't there. So, he had an injury that kept him out most of the season last year. He's back this year. They brought in Kanye Udo from Army to take over in the backfield from Cam Scatterboo. So this is what I look at. And I'm sorry, they were 6-1 in one-score games. So what I look at here for Arizona State is week 2. Week 2, they go get some cowbell. Mississippi State, a team that is coming off of a 2-win season, with their coach from Oklahoma, Jeff Lebby. So they're going to score points. You got to be ready for that game. Don't sleep on it. But then the next week, I'm looking at that Texas State game. They came down here to San Marcos last year and got everything they wanted on a Thursday night. They go to Baylor. They go to Utah. They go to Iowa State. So in other words, Mr. Logical, what I'm saying is I don't think Arizona State's going to repeat, because you probably got to win 2 out of those 3, road games that I just mentioned to give yourself a chance. And I just don't see it. Malik McClain, is their other leading receiver coming back. He only had 2 catches last year, but it was one of those things. It was 2 catches for 85 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah.
So their offense got the press last year, but I think their defense deserves some flowers too, because this is the Big 12 that we're talking about, and
they're not really known for defense.
Yeah, and Arizona State last year came in pushing people around and made a name for themselves. And to your point, went toe to toe with Texas. So I'm not saying
had the Texas game won.
Right, and there was that call too. I mean, I don't want to get into all that, but there was the targeting and all that. So so as I look at Arizona State, I see a team that isn't going to regress to the point of they're only going to go 7-5 or something along those lines. I just think they got the schedule that's going to prevent them from getting there.
I like your breakdown of the schedule. Something that, like I said, you're the numbers guy. I tend to go a different direction. Last year, in between the bowl games, at the end of the season, bowl games, transfer portal open, their coach Dillingham told guys, listen, if you want to enter the portal, go ahead. But you still can travel with us as a team. You still can work with us. I'll help you if you want to transfer. I'm not going to just dismiss you because you want to go find an opportunity somewhere else. You can stay here with us, do the bowl games, participate, play in the game if you want, whatever the case may be. I think understanding that, because some coaches do it different. Like, if you don't want to be here, don't be here. It's like, listen, everybody's looking for opportunities. I imagine if, I'm not trying to put, words to his mouth, but I imagine if some SEC school called, said, hey, we want to give you $9 million a year for the next 7 years. I'm pretty sure he entertained that phone call and still be committed to Arizona State. But it's like, if I can get this opportunity potentially to move and these players are doing the same thing, why not nurture that and make sure, okay, are you prepared for the portal? What kind of advice are you getting? Did you talk to an agent? Who put you, who convinced you to get in the portal? And just kind of keeping guys close, because you can feel isolated. We talk about this all the time. It goes back to that Jaden Daniels video where everybody was filming him, telling me he sucks anyway. You don't want players to be treated like that when they're trying to make an opportunity for themselves. And I think that kind of that ability to galvanize players I think that musters you to 9-3, where you should have been 7-5. I think that might. I think that 6-1 and one score games comes from that. Like when you go to the sideline, you've seen it probably with some of your children when they've done sports. I've seen it as well. When the coach seems like he understands the magnitude of the moment, he doesn't get too big, too high, too low. The players respond to that. Listen, we need one stop. We're down 8. We need one stop. We're gonna get a touchdown, 2-point conversion, tie this game. We're going to overtime. If that coach is always like that, 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter, when he comes over to your offensive huddle, when the defense is on the field, because you just told the defense, get this stop, he comes up to the offense and says, hey, we're going to get this stop and you guys are going to score a touchdown, 2-point conversion. You believe that. And I think that just kind of permeates throughout your team. That's why I think it's likely that they could repeat. I think they could. I think offensively, like you said, you talk about McLean. What's the other wide receiver? Jordan Tyson. I talked about this on defense in college football. Some guys are just not paying attention and they're looking over the wrong shoulder, and guys are running wide open down the field. And Levitt has the arm, the experience to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and you touched on something that I would like to respond to, as far as Ken Dillingham goes. It's one of those things, we talk about the conference media rights, the money that the conferences get from the TV deals. And he's an Arizona guy. Like, he grew up in Arizona, went to high school, went to Arizona State. You know what I mean? But it's one of those things, like you said, at some point when Arizona State can only offer you, $6 million, I'm just making up numbers, $6 million or so, and then somebody comes through double that. I mean, so it kind of, those are the things that kind of make me mad as well, because I know people get upset about the transfer portal and everything. But when I think of when
you're a coach that supports the players, then I tip my cap to you, because a lot of coaches treat the uniform that players wear as if I gave you the talent to wear this uniform. It's like, no, you gave me the uniform. I came here with talent. You gave me an opportunity, and I respect that. But somebody else is going to give me one as well. Like, it's not dismissive of you, but it's like somebody else is giving me an opportunity.
Yeah, as a wise man once said, I gave you power, I made you buck wild. So we got Baylor, Coach Dave Aranda, he saved his job last year. He was one of these coaches that came into last year on the hot seat. You might remember him from the LSU national title team, with Ed Orgeron. He was the defensive coordinator there. Baylor had a hell of a year last year. Like I said, they finished 7-2 in conference. They were 8-5 overall. That Colorado game kind of determined their fate, if you will. But last year they brought in Daquan Finn from Toledo, and he was supposed to be the starting quarterback that was going to revitalize the downtrodden program. We turn around, Sawyer Robertson comes out of nowhere. Now all of a sudden Baylor has a quarterback that they can depend on. Now,
correct.
So he ended the season with a lot of momentum, but is Baylor out of the woods? Because as I look at Baylor, I see a team that could very well compete for this Big 12 title, but they still have a few question marks that I think need to be addressed. And I would like to take issue with the Big 12 for a quick second too, because I need Baylor, Texas Tech every year, as the guy that likes the rivalries and all that. One of the questions I got about Baylor, of course, is the schedule, because worst case scenario, Baylor could start 0-2. They got Auburn coming in to start the season, and then they go to SMU, old SWC matchup. Baylor's won 13 straight against SMU, but they haven't played since 2016. So that's going to be one of those big things going up to Dallas. SMU coming off their playoff year last year, new inspired team. They're going to give you everything. They're going to give you everything. So you got to get that Auburn game. And I don't know if you saw this. I'll bring this up real quick, even though we're talking about the SEC Friday. Auburn has 3 different coaches calling plays on 3 different downs. So they got the offensive coordinator. They got the offensive coordinator calling first down.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and book that as a win for Baylor. That's not sustainable.
That's not sustainable. I know they got Hugh Freeze calling second down. They got another coach calling third down plays. Even though Hugh Freeze can override. Was that?
So all three of them going to decide on fourth down, or just the head coach?
No, the head coach is going to override everything, but they have the ability to call the first down and third down plays. On top of that, Auburn has Jackson Arnold, Deuce Knight, and Ashton Daniels from Stanford. So they got a three-headed quarterback problem. Jackson Arnold, if you remember, he's the guy that Oklahoma told Dylan Gabriel to go take a hike. Said we got it from here. And it didn't work out. And I've been talking about for the last couple of years how I'm not impressed with this guy. So I got Baylor winning that game. What up, Residente? Said so like, I think that Baylor can get that win just based off of all the, for lack of better words, dysfunction going on the Plains. That SMU game, though, I think looms very large. If Baylor can get that game, as I like to say, you're cooking with gas going into beating Samford, and then you set yourself up for a showdown with Arizona State on the 20th of September. You go to Stillwater.
Really do themselves any favors with this schedule, having two tough Power 5 conference teams, and then you get your proverbial, practice game.
Right. The good news is, though, is that they play these teams that are going to be involved in the conference title race, and they get them all at home. They get Arizona State at home. They get K-State at home. They get Utah at home.
At home. UCF at home.
Yeah, so Baylor benefits in the way that Arizona doesn't, or Arizona State, as we were just talking about. On top of that, they got Bryson Washington back, 1,699 yards, 18 touchdowns. They got Kobe Prentice coming in over from Alabama, wide receiver, who didn't really get the time at Alabama. I think he's a very good wide receiver, but you're just fighting for minutes there. You know what I mean?
It's a lot, you're 6 deep.
So I think
he the transfer portal for that one.
Yeah, I think he could end up being their game breaker. So would I wake up in December and see Baylor in the Big 12 championship game and lose my mind because that wasn't supposed to happen? Absolutely not. If Baylor goes anything worse than 8-4, I'd be real surprised.
Yeah, I like the faith you have in them. They were in the championship a couple years ago. Great play at the goal line. Like I said, sometimes when you have like a Texas football team, it is like a religion down there. So you're gonna have to deliver. And I think 8-4 could potentially get them fired, or and that's the problem with like.
Well, I don't know. Like coming off of last year, you know what I mean. Like I said, they were pretty downtrodden before that, and they won 8 games last year. So if they can go 8-4, win the bowl game to get to 9, I think that's fine. Like as long as they don't go 6-6 or worse, I think he'll come back another year.
We'll see. You're Baylor in the Big 12 championship game. Like no one had Iowa State and Arizona State last year, so
yeah,
Angels
in the outfield.
Colorado is going to be Colorado versus someone, which is probably what the consensus was last year. But we also had that panned out.
So we got BYU. We talked about the BYU. He's over at Tulane now. So who's taking over at quarterback? The one and only Bear Bachmeier wearing number 47. And I don't know how the naming conventions in that family works because you got him, you have his brother Tiger on the roster, and then their older brother Hank, who played quarterback for Boise State and Wake Forest. And I'm sad to say he walked into Tallahassee Doak Campbell Stadium. Their brother did, and beat Florida State a couple years ago. So this family does have football pedigree, but I just don't know. You're turning it over to an inexperienced guy who came from Stanford, who didn't play a lot. He didn't play there, so you're here now. So they still got Chase Roberts to throw the ball to, so that's great. But they lost Keelan Marion to Miami. He was the speedster return guy. Reminds me a lot of Clay from Utah a couple years ago. Reminds me a lot of that. So they do play Stanford in week 2, so I know they get a win there. Their defense, They're bringing back linebackers Jack Kelly and Isaiah Glasker. 21 and a half sacks between them last year. Oh, I'm sorry, 8.5 sacks, 21 and a half tackles for loss. They're replacing the secondary, they're replacing the defensive line. But I believe in Kalani Sataki to field a decent enough defense to have them win games that they shouldn't. They should go 3-0 out of conference, looking at their schedule. It's not very tough to navigate. I mentioned the Stafford game. They also play Portland State, and they go to East Carolina in the mythological, why the hell is this Power 4 team going to this G5 Stadium game?
Yes.
And then, but the big
BYU is also flooded with a lot of older players. There's a lot of redshirt seniors, a lot of redshirt juniors, a lot of guys that do their mission, so they come back at 21 and they continue playing football. So I think even starting the young guy, Bear at quarterback, the 47 is weird, but he's a speedster. He can move. He's probably a strict dual threat quarterback. But yeah, they have size and a lot of essentially grown man strength in comparison to their opponents. A lot of the players are probably closer to 22 or 23. We know we're seeing a lot with the transfer portal, but this is a staple of BYU to have players of that age. So the maturity, they don't get dumb penalties. They don't get showboating penalties, unnecessary roughness, unsportsmanlike conduct. A lot of those penalties don't, so they don't hurt themselves. Very mature team. So I think that in of itself will help any young player they have on the team, because there is a 23 or 24-year-old in your huddle with you or in your position group that's going to get you to come back down to earth and just keep you more even killed, because they have a talent edge as well too, because they recruit Utah well. We talk about the Polynesian and the Pacific Islander connection that BYU has, so you get a lot of size, speed combinations, very similar to the SEC, where you have a guy who's 6'2", 320, but he also runs like a 4'8", 40. Is like, guys aren't supposed to move like that. BYU gets a lot of guys like that.
Yeah, and like the back half of their schedule isn't so friendly. They get the Holy War on October 18th and then go to Iowa State the week after. They get a bye week after that, but then they go to Texas Tech. They come back home for TCU, so they could legitimately go 0-4 in that stretch. But of course, the game that I have circled on the calendar is 9/27. The game at Boulder, Colorado. They just happened to play each other in that bowl game last year, and BYU smacked them up and down the field. So I imagine, Colorado's going to get a whole bunch of watch these videos that week, and they're going to come out with a chip on their shoulder. Even though some of those players weren't there, you got Coach Prime, Sapp, Marshall Falk, so on and so forth, with they're in your ear. They're in your ear trying to, tell you about the importance of that game and getting your lick back. So BYU, not a contender this year. I don't think they can repeat their +8 turnover margin from last year. Some of these things just aren't repeatable in that way. Even if they win the turnover battle, it could be +2. But trying to get it back to that +8 range, which they would probably need to be a contender again, I think that might be asking a little much. So I brought up Cincinnati, Scott Satterfield. Look, Cincinnati's 4-14 since they joined the Big 12, but they have a good quarterback, Brent Sorsby, who's going to make plays with his legs this year. They lost Corey Kiner, their leading rusher from last year. They lost their top 4 wide receivers, but Evan Pryor, remember that name, Evan Pryor is coming in at running back. He's the home run hitter, if you will. He's going to be that guy that takes what should be a 3-yard gain and it ends up 21. So you can stay in games that way. Their defense returns 8 starters. So I think that if I could handicap them in a way, I would think of them as what I thought Kansas was going to be last year. I thought Kansas was going to have a chance to make noise and, the ripple effect, not necessarily win the Big 12, but just make a lot of noise and cause problems for the contenders. So I think Cincinnati can fill that role if Scott Satterfield can get his head on straight. I'll just say that. But Mr. Logical,
That's a
they
big
start
ass.
off their
Got it.
season. They start off their season on Thursday next week in the games that Mr. Logical hate because they're going to play Nebraska at Arrowhead.
Like, it
No
doesn't make
neutral
any
site.
sense. It just flat out doesn't make any sense. Like on top of the fact, it's like, why would Arrowhead? Why would they like? I wouldn't say like their turf is going to get damaged. I mean, it's August, unless it rains heavily and they tear the
Well,
grass up.
Kansas City's first game is in Brazil, so
Yeah, that's some terrible grass too. I saw like, are you? I know Kansas played Colorado in Arrowhead.
they played all their home games last year in Arrowhead because they were getting stadium renovation.
Yeah, and that looked like a feverish kind of crowd. I'm not sure if Nebraska and Ohio, like, I'm not sure like if that's the great meeting point for a college football game, considering that Nebraska already has a great home field environment. Like they already had, like, you don't need to cultivate like this environment of like, oh, we need a great college football atmosphere. Let's do it at NFL stadium. They have like the third down jump around where the whole like they have that already. They have like that kind of just real college atmosphere. Now you just gotta
Well,
make
this is
people
one of those
travel.
money things, right? Like we were just talking about that Josh Pate video where he was
Georgia
talking
Tech's
about
gonna get $12 million.
right. So like in this scenario, I'm assuming, I don't want to, but I'm assuming that this was supposed to be a Cincinnati home game because Nebraska Stadium sits around 80,000 or so. So I don't think they would have moved it from Lincoln. So Nippert Stadium, where Cincinnati plays, only seats 40,000. So I think this was one of those money grabs of
So
we're
it's like,
playing a
yeah,
big name opponent.
your home stadium gets 40,000 people. What is your expectation for a road game in fucking Missouri gonna get you from
Yeah,
Ohio?
I mean, you got the Cleveland Browns and the Bengals right there. You got the Bengals. You're in Cincinnati. You're from Cincinnati.
It's like, why am I? Yeah. So,
Yeah, Mr.
needless to
Logical
say,
doesn't
they're,
like
they're
that
gonna lose
stuff.
the game just because I don't like it. They're gonna lose the game, and it's a night game. It's like, yo, is that really prime time? Like, you're not a prime time team unless you're just riding the hype of Dylan Raiola and Patrick Mahomes and the fact that he's cosplaying Patrick Mahomes. So let's put Dylan Raiola in Kansas City, which is
I didn't
even
even think about
cornier.
that. That's a good angle right there.
That's so corny.
You
No one's
know,
gonna buy a ticket because of that. No one's gonna buy a ticket because he looks like Patrick Mahomes, and they
well, I
wear the
mean,
same
I don't think you're
glasses
going
and
to
they
have
have
a
curly
problem
hair.
selling. I don't think you're going to have a problem selling tickets. That stadium will probably be 80 to 20 Cornhuskers.
Yeah, because it's August and people love football, but I just think that as a money grab, that's just kind of corny. But that's just me.
Yeah, so they get Bowling Green and Northwestern State after that. They go to Lawrence. Then they get Iowa State at home, UCF. Then the big one. Well, I'm going to say the big one, but I'm just saying big is don't get tripped up going to Stillwater. But then they get Baylor and at Utah back to back. So as I look at the schedule, Cincinnati should be able to navigate themselves to a bowl game. If everything goes right, they could be looking at 8 wins. And by looking right, what I mean by that is you win at Kansas. You don't slip up against UCF. You don't slip up in Stillwater. You beat Arizona.
So
You,
they're 4-14 since joining the Big 12,
right.
and this is the year you got them doubling their win
No,
total
I'm
or
just
something
saying
like
that's best
18.
case scenario. I got them at 6-6, but I'm just saying that that's best case scenario. Is you figure they
It's
lose to
looking real
Nebraska.
5-7-ish, 4-8-ish.
Yeah, you figure they're going to
Maybe
lose.
Oklahoma State, unless they make a turnaround.
But that's the thing. What if they beat Nebraska next week? Then it's all bets are off. You know what I mean? But they play Nebraska. I think they're going to lose that. I think they're going to lose the Iowa State. They're going to lose the Baylor, and they're going to lose at Utah and maybe at TCU. The rest of those are winnable games and mostly toss-ups. So maybe 7-5 is the best case scenario, but I got them at 6-6.
Let's say BYU's a loss, TCU, Utah, Baylor, UCF, Iowa State, Kansas, and Nebraska. So I think I just ran all 7.
Yep. All right. So yeah, but I like Brent Sorsby, so we'll see. And then of course, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Ralphie. You know what I'm saying? The Buffalo. So as you mentioned earlier, it's not just Shador, it's not just Travis, it's not just Shiloh. You know what I'm saying? There's Wester Will Shepherd, Jimmy Horn. You know, they lost the running back, Augustave, you know, who wasn't necessarily a great running back in that way as far as getting yards, but I feel like him and Shiloh did a great job of setting the tone offensively and defensively, like attitude wise, physically wise. So, you know, and of course, you got this element of we got to play for Coach Prime. So, my guy that used to jump off the screen for Colorado, Nakai Hill Green, is at Alabama now. So now he's going to jump off of, you know, SEC and ESPN screens. But, you know, so Colorado has a lot of loss, but of course they hit the portal. One of the things that hampered Colorado initially when Coach Prime got there was the offensive line. You know, now they got Jordan Seaton on the offensive line as the leader. What up, bro? You know what I'm saying? Welcome. You know what I'm saying? You had Jordan Seaton as one of the best linemen in the country. He could be in that next Joe Alt type conversation, you know, according to the scouts. So, you know, they went out and got some receivers, of course. Hakeem Williams from Florida State, so another one of those dudes that can't catch the ball, you know. But they went and got a 6'5" receiver out of Campbell, you know, the Fighting Camels, Sincere Brown, you know. So he played at USF prior. Dallin Hayden at running back, he didn't do a lot last year, but they got DeKalen Taylor. He's coming in running back transfer from the University of the Incarnate Word down here in the Alamo.
Shout out to Cam Ward.
Go Cardinals. So when I look at this team, I expect a lot of Jekyll and Hyde. I wonder how long it's going to take for Colorado to play Juju Lewis because Caden Salter is coming in as the starting quarterback. It looks like right now he came in from Liberty, you know, had a great season 2 years ago, 32 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, but then something crazy happened. He tried to transfer to Auburn last year. And for whatever reason, I don't know the reason, but it just didn't work out. So he ended up back at Liberty. So there were rumors about the locker room. You know, he didn't really want to be there. You know, he had one foot out the door. So he fell back last year, 15 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Colorado last year, just like BYU, forced the turnovers. So, you know, that's going to be the determinant. I like Colorado's schedule as well, as far as, you know, who's coming in, who they go on the road to play, because, you know, they're starting out with Georgia Tech coming in. I think that's a loss, but, you know, they get Delaware playing their first FBS football game. They go to Houston. Knock, knock. Houston's my sleeper in the Big 12 this year. They get Wyoming at home. They get BYU at home before going to TCU and then Iowa State. So that's where it gets tough. This 3-game stretch starting on October 4th. They go to TCU.
Yep.
They come home for Iowa State, bye week, and then you go to Utah. After that, you close with Arizona at West Virginia, and then the last 2 games, Arizona State at home and K-State on the road. So I don't know, Mr. Logical. I'm trying to find the wins. You know, I want to have faith in the staff, but it's hard for me to get there. So I'm going to just say, in my opinion, best case scenario would be the quarterback, you know, whoever it may be, hits the ground running.
Quarterback hits. The quarterback has to be able to make plays.
Yes. So I'm looking at best case scenario 8-4, but for the time being, until I see it in action, I think I'm going to go 5-7, because I think that Salter will play well enough, you know, to beat Delaware. But then after that, I wonder, you know, if we're going to start getting the calls for Juju.
Yeah, that's a tough. Dion has been known to kind of galvanize players, but we got to think. You're saying 5-7 is your most likely scenario?
Yeah.
Okay. Someone might look at that like, there's no way. They went 4-8 a couple years ago with Shador and Travis. Shador being first round talent at quarterback and a just really good quarterback in general. Then, of course, you saw what Travis did as was the Heisman Trophy last year. So if they don't win up front, it's gonna look a lot like this is how we looked 2 years ago. A lot of guys transferred in. I think it could be a lot of people looking to transfer out if you don't start off great. Because Dion, we talked about this in other sports where like Kareem, Kobe, Jordan, Magic, all these greats. It's hard for greats to be good coaches because they were at a different level when they were at their highest level playing whatever level you're at. So in college football, Dion, Warren Sapp, even Brian Leftwich, you said Marshall Falks on the staff. A lot of these guys were just all American talent. And if they're looking at you and they're telling you, hey, I think you could be an all American, but it's like they might not have that extra gear, it could weigh on you. We talked about the guy that transferred last year, the one that was out of Florida. I think he transferred back to Florida.
The
The
corner.
corner, yeah,
Kamani. Yeah.
Kermani.
Yeah.
Dion probably was trying to tell him, like, listen, you have the talent to be as good as I was, and like riding them and try to pull it out. Maybe people don't respond that way, and I think if it starts to look like, hey, at 3-3, we're looking at like we're going to be 5-7. There's going to be a lot of people with their feet, headed towards the door. So I think that could be a problem for
You
Colorado.
think Dion be
They
walking?
got to win up front.
You think Dion
What?
be walking in the locker room saying that these 2016 rappers ruined the game?
I mean, he probably comes in there like an old head like me. And, it might rub people the wrong way. Sometimes truth hurts, but
I got
it comes with
Houston.
territory.
Houston is my sleeper in the Big 12 last year in the vein that I was looking at Arizona State through. They got Connor Wigman coming in from Texas A&M as the new quarterback. He brings experience and grit, and he only lost his job because of upside. Marcel Reed was younger. He had the legs, and, it was just one of those things. Like, am I going to waste the season with this guy that's probably going to transfer out or be gone next year anyway? Or can I turn it over to the young guy, get him some experience? That's what happened. It's year 2 of Willie Fritz, who I think is probably at least a top 4 coach in the Big 12 right now. So they went 4-8 last year. Don't be tricked by that. Don't be tricked by that. They beat both Kansas State and Utah last year. So, it's just one of those things. I know Residente, double XL freshman, get out of here. I like their schedule too, because even though there are some tough opponents on their schedule, but Houston's weakness is their secondary. And when I look at it, I'm trying to figure out who affects their secondary. It's not Stephen F. Austin. Rice runs the wishbone. We're trying to figure out what Colorado's quarterback is going to be. Oregon State next. Malik Murphy, I'm not sure what he can do against, anybody of note. Texas Tech, okay, you stumble there, go to Stillwater. Maybe you slip up there just because you're a young team trying to figure out how to win. I think you beat Arizona. You lose to Arizona State. West Virginia is not going to throw the ball all around the yard with Rich Rod. UCF is still trying to figure out who their quarterback is. TCU is going to slice and dice you, and Baylor is going to slice and dice you. So I'm going on record to say that the same way that I said Arizona State was going to be my surprise team and go 8-4 last year, Houston is my 8-4 for this year. Dean Connors in the backfield. Let's get it done.
I like it. Listen, when you talk college football, I tend to listen. I rarely argue. We need to get somebody in here that's going to argue with you. But I mean, like I said, like you said, if you feel like their pass defense is going to be their Achilles heel, maybe someone's going to exploit. I think Colorado is going to be one of those teams that's going to try to take the shot. I think Colorado looks at it like, hey, if we can get this deep shot, i.e., getting a 6'5" wide receiver in the transfer portal, if we can get this deep shot off, then we can impact winning that way. Like I said, Houston just has to show me Like they should be good. Like I feel all Texas teams should be good. It's just my opinion. It sounds
Yeah,
ridiculous,
I
but
mean Willie
I think
Fritz is just a winner.
they shouldn't be terrible. At no point should a Texas team just be 3-9 or just like you should be able to recruit your backyard, transfer portals, oil money, business money, whatever it is that was leading the pony excess with SMU 30, 40 years ago. That mentality is still ingrained into the state of Texas in regards to football. So I
And
think Houston should be better. But
and
if
all
you
I'm
have
gonna
a
say is,
surprise, we'll keep an eye out for it.
don't forget Willie Fritz was the coach that led Tulane to that victory over Caleb Williams in the Cotton Bowl. Iowa State, they made it to the Big 12 championship game last year. Mr. Logical, years like this don't happen in Ames very often. They don't usually get the type of talent that they had on the outside, Jaden Higgins and Noel last year. It was the first time that they ever won double-digit games. The last time Iowa State won a conference title was the same year that the Titanic went down.
So yeah,
Nuts.
last year was a fluke.
Nuts. So before I get to that, Matt Campbell, good head coach. I think he's missed the boat a few times where he could have left Iowa State and got a better job, but it's got to catch up at some point because I don't know how often you could get those type of players into Iowa State. Rocco Beck, good quarterback. We're ready to do this. 3,500 yards last year. Can they get back to the Big 12 title game? I'm going to say no. And I'm going to start off, I don't usually do bold predictions. I usually just say what I say, and I don't think about how bold it is, but I'm going to call this one a bold prediction because people seem to like those words. So Iowa State starting 0-2. They got Farmageddon this weekend over in Ireland. And when they get back from Ireland, they got the Hawkeyes waiting on them. Now, granted, that game is in Ames, but they got the Hawkeyes waiting for them after that long trip across the pond, if you will. I don't know if Ireland counts as the pond or not.
Why are they playing in Ireland?
That's just what they do. Or I guess they got South Dakota in between. So let me rephrase. They'll be 1-2. I don't know. There's a game overseas every year to start the season now. So before it was Nebraska, Northwestern, and Ireland. Last year it was Florida State. I don't know why I said Ireland like that. It sounded like I was trying to be
Ireland,
Irish. Yeah. You had Florida State and Georgia Tech over there last year. Next year, Michigan and Western Michigan play in Germany. That was the post going around. They just signed that guy. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but it's Hiter, and they're going to play in Germany.
It looks very close to Hitler.
Yeah. Side note: Sharon Moore is going to be suspended for that game, but Iowa State is a good team that I think just last year things just went in their favor. The talent was on their side, but I could see Iowa State falling back to that 8-4, 7-5 range. Losing to Arizona State, losing to at TCU, losing to Iowa, losing to K-State, and then just getting picked off by somebody that they shouldn't. That just somebody that has a little bit more talent, but maybe not the coach that Iowa State has.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm rolling with.
Okay.
All right. Kansas Jayhawks. Back home in Memorial Stadium, we talked about it earlier. They played their home games at Arrowhead last year. So Kansas was a wild story last year. I picked them, to be an upper echelon team. They finished 5-7. And they were sitting there at 3-6. And then they went out, they beat BYU, they beat Colorado, they beat Iowa State. What was going on in the state of Kansas?
There was some crazy, like that was the first time any team had ever been that many games under 500 and then beat the teams that they back to back. Yeah, so it's very strange. I watched that Colorado Kansas game. Kansas looked like a 7-2 team in that game. Like they just answered every call that Colorado came with. I believe Colorado was down a couple possessions, got the ball to Travis Hunter on a little bubble screen. He slipped a couple tackles, scored a touchdown. You thought, like, okay, hey, this is where the floodgates open up. This is where Kansas goes back, change back to a pumpkin, and Colorado presses forward.
This is when they go back to Oz.
And then they just kept pushing. They kept pushing. They kept pushing. They were getting a lot of like late hits on Shador. A couple of them folding them up. But yeah, Kansas, it was a strange team. But like I said, they have the running game. I think if you control the line of scrimmage, control the clock, you control football games. I think that's what they did for that 3-week stretch. Maybe it translates into this year, but I mean, what say you?
I say that, there's a couple of questions here. Jalen Daniels is back. He's going to be celebrating his 39th birthday at quarterback. A couple years ago, I don't know if you remember this, but there was the Kansas TCU game, college game day. They were both undefeated. And it was like, oh, wow, like Kansas is back. But then last year, like I said, they fell back off. So Jeff Grimes, their offensive coordinator, went to Wisconsin. But I think Kansas has the best coach in the Big 12, Lance Leipold. Devin Neal's gone off to the NFL, so there's going to be tough to replace that running back.
Yeah.
You probably remember him from that Colorado game as well.
Then he was untackleable.
Yeah, And then they lost Kobe Bryant and Mello Dotson out the secondary. So that's going to be tough to replace, even though they do bring in Saeed Gibbs from Georgia Tech, who I think might be able to step in. The biggest thing for me for Kansas this year, I'm thinking bowl game 6-6, but the thing that I'm happy about is that Missouri is back on the schedule like they should be. The border war hasn't been played since 2011. Back in 2007, they were both top 5 teams. Kansas ended up in the Orange Bowl that year. It should be played every year. Every year. But,
bring back rivalry games.
Bring back rivalry. Make rivalries great again. But, Kansas, though, I will say, this weekend, they're on upset alert. They're playing Fresno State. And for all of those of you out there saying, why the hell would 2-5 pick Fresno State? David Carr ain't walking through that door. You know what I'm saying? Well, I'll tell you who is walking through that door. Matt Entz, head coach coming over from North Dakota State. All I'm going to say is, watch out, Jayhawks.
All he does is win.
Jayhawks favored by 13 last I saw, but I'm just saying, watch out. So, but I'll say they win. They get Wagner week 2. They're going to lose at Missouri. Then they get 2 games that are going to determine how their season goes. They're both home games, West Virginia and Cincinnati. Then they go to UCF. So I'm going to give you a UCF as a loss just because of the travel, but you got to win those 2 games, West Virginia and Cincinnati, if you want to have any shot to make anything that looks like a run. So I'm going to go 6-6 with the Jayhawks, but I'm hoping for more. So as I go across the Sunflower State, Kansas State, Avery Johnson, year 2 as a starter. I had high hopes for him last year. He let me down with his 58% passing percentage.
Yeah.
They lost DJ Giddens to the NFL. But you know who they got at running back now? They got Dylan Edwards, former Colorado guy there. Avery Johnson, for example, he Farmageddon this weekend against Iowa State. He went 12 for 28 against Iowa State last year. So, I'm looking forward to a bounce back there.
Yeah, you got to do. But you got college football 67 to 70%.
Yeah. And
because your zones are wide open. Like you got to hit these guys that are wide open and running through these zones.
So if Kansas State doesn't win the Big 12 this year, I think Chris Kleiman is going to start hearing from the locals. I don't think he'll get fired. I don't think they will even fire him next year. But I think that bloom is going to fall off because if you remember, they actually won the Big 12 the year that TCU went to the national title game. They won that Big 12 title game and, got smacked by Alabama in the Sugar Bowl after that. So, I think the fans are feeling like, hey, look, we're one of the most consistent teams in this conference. We get talent, even though it's not necessarily top end across the board. You can always count on Kansas State for good secondary, sound special teams, and a running back. Those are the 3 things that you can always count on. And,
Yes.
if Avery Johnson can take a step forward, this team is going to win the Big 12 this year. But
He's
that's,
getting a lot of hypes, doing a lot of interviews. I think
yeah.
he's on some, he's on some awards watch list because we talked about the parity in the Big 12 it's the best the better players in the Big 12 are going to be highlighted for potentially Heisman and other trophies because it's going to be competitive. It's going to be, like you said, the most competitive. We don't think the ACC is going to be very competitive. We don't think the Big Ten is going to be very competitive. You've already kind of, we haven't done the SEC preview, but we understand like the
Oh,
cream,
the
the
SEC
creme
is
of the
going to
cream
be,
of SEC is going to be
it's
crazy,
going to
but
be a
there's still,
doozy.
but it's definitely still going to be like 6 or 7 teams that just, we can pretty much scratch off from the beginning. And then there's going to be a couple of teams that are just going to ascend. I think the Big 12 is one of those
Don't
teams that
be
just are
taking
going to be fortunate.
don't be taking shots at our guy Diego Pavia. You know what
So
I'm
I didn't
saying?
take any shots. I didn't take any
You know
shots.
what
I'm
I'm
just
saying?
saying
He beat
some.
Bama and Auburn last year. You take
And
that
now
back.
they have national championship aspirations.
You
I
know,
don't think anyone in the Big 12 is saying that stuff in interviews. I mean, like they're not ahead of themselves, and I think that's going to be part of how they conduct their business next season.
yeah. So I got Kansas State starting 5-0 heading into Waco. Then we'll see what happens there. They got TCU at home the week after that. They get Texas Tech at home. The big one, they go to Utah. That's going to be the big one. That in that game right there might determine which one of those two teams, if not both of them, get to the the Big 12 championship game. So, Kansas State is at a crossroad because Oklahoma State was expected to be the new, Big 12 team that was going to take over once OU and Texas left. Going back to your point about the oil money,
Yes.
they were supposed to be the new leader in the clubhouse, and they obviously have been disappointing. Like I said, they finished 3-9 last year. So Kansas State has a chance, for lack of better words, to reach for the brass ring, and they can lead the Big 12 going into the 2030s. But we're going to have to see. But real quick, the last time Kansas State lost to Kansas, 2009. How about that for a Sunflower State rivalry? Oklahoma State, we just talked about. Weird season last year. They had Ollie Gordon coming off the 1,700 yards, won the Doak Walker Award, and then he looked like a shell of himself. They had Alan Bowman, who was on the Brandon Whedon plan, and it just fell
Yeah.
apart. They went 0-9 in the Big 12 last year, but somehow they beat Arkansas at Arkansas. And I only say that Arkansas is not that good, but I'm just saying they won on a SEC road environment and went 0-9 in the conference. The brass ring is like, that's the leader, that's the title, man. Like I said, Mike Gundy gave back $1 million to be able to keep his job in Stillwater this year. I don't expect Mike Gundy to be this bad 2 years in a row. He went out and got Todd Grantham, former Florida defensive coordinator, to run the defense this year. But the offense replacing all 11. He still hasn't named a quarterback yet. It's down to Zane Flores and Haas. I imagine it's Heine, who came over from TCU with the offensive coordinator from TCU, Doug Meacham. So it's life after Ollie Gordon. I'm just saying, hey, matter of fact, go back and watch that those Bloods in Little Rock Residente. That was one of the shows that raised me on HBO. But
Banging in Little Rock.
Yeah, Banging in Little Rock. But yeah.
Yeah.
So Oklahoma State, I think it's going to be tough sledding. Just looking at the schedule here, they get their freebie, and then they go to Autzen Stadium to play the Ducks. They get Tulsa, so they should start 2-1 at the very least.
It's probably 1-2.
They get Baylor. Go
1-3.
to Arizona, get Houston, Cincinnati. So that 3-game stretch at Arizona, at home for Houston and Cincinnati is going to tell the tale of the season because they go to Texas Tech the week after that. And then you got Kansas State later in the season, Iowa State later in the season, both at home. So I'm gonna just say, and I know Mike Gundy doesn't want to hear this, but if Oklahoma State finishes 5-7, I'm
It'll be a
impressed.
miracle.
I'm
Yeah.
impressed. So
You go 0-9 in the Big 12 and you got to replace all 11 starters. And then you haven't picked a quarterback yet. So that means you didn't get a. So, like the old adage, if you have two quarterbacks, you don't have one. And I'm not sure Mike Gundy, he's been coaching there for a long time.
yeah,
And
18 years, I believe.
yeah, it's some, like Sam Cook said, a change gonna come. And it might need to be sooner rather than later because you ran it back. And like I said, the way he handled the Ollie Gordon stuff last year, instead of just being like, hey, this guy messed up. We're gonna give him, his opportunity to redeem himself, so forth, yada 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 yada. He like made like a joke of it, like I'm gonna be running them.
Yeah, I'm gonna give him 50 carries.
Yeah, he just didn't handle it well, and it's like understand the new dynamics of like how to operate in the media. That I'm a man, I'm 40,
Well, he's
yelling
a
all that.
man and he's 58 now.
Now
That
he's
was
fit. Yeah,
18 years ago.
yeah, it was a long time.
So
So
so do
that's
you think
that's his
that
highlight. That's the highlight of his coaching career is that
so,
press
so, so
conference.
do you think that with the way he handled that real quick, with the way that he handled that, do you think that I don't want to say contributed to how the season played out, but do you think that had an effect?
Well, it's the opposite of how Ken
Still a
Dillingham
man.
handles situations in Arizona State. Like coaching is not just as a figurehead, your temperament resonates through the team. And if what you are providing the team energy wise starts to fall flat, they get rid of the coach. They don't get rid of the team. Like when leadership comes down, the owners or whoever's calling the shots for a team or an organization, they get rid of the coach. Like it's your job to make sure that the message is clear and it's effective. That way it's useful for all the players. You have a lot of players, a lot of coaches. If your voice is falling on deaf ears because your tactics or the way you handle situations is falling short of, integrity or good conduct, then I get rid of you. So back in the day, you could get away with just having some bad apples in your bunch and still win games, and like the Bobby Bell, like, hey, if one of my kids get a good discount, I want to know how he got it. Yeah, that was cool in '99 and 2000. Not the same now.
It's not the same.
So, and
Um,
if that doesn't turn into wins, he's out of there.
so as we come down the stretch here, we got TCU 13-11 since that national title run. Ooh, 65-7. Josh Hoover is back. The media seems to be in love with TCU. They seem to be in love with the Frogs. All I'm gonna say is, tread lightly. Tread lightly. Don't fall in love with the media, sweetheart. But then you had Quentin Johnson that year. You got Savion Williams drafted in the third round this year. Now you enter Jordan Dwyer. So listen out for that name. He transferred in from Iowa, roughly 1,200 yards last year. They got Kavorian Barnes, from UTSA. Go Roadrunners. After seeing him for 3 years, even though I just gave that shout out, they could do
Yeah.
better. 6 starters back on offense, 8 on defense. Josh Hoover, the quarterback, one of 2 players that are coming back to college football this year to throw for 4,000 yards. The other was Garrett Nussmeier at LSU. They won 6 of their last 7 to finish out the season last year. They open up with Bill Belichick. And, I was thinking about this earlier, right? Could North Carolina win the ACC? I know we already did the ACC preview, but this is
No.
a joke. This is a joke, by the way. So they always talked about the stat, like first time quarterbacks playing against Bill Belichick and how he dominated them. Well, he's playing everybody for the first time this
Yeah,
year.
he's playing a shit ton of rookies. So, like in theory, based off the way he operated as a pro, but he doesn't have a bunch of 29-year-old, 260-pound linebackers the way he liked in New England. Because remember, his thing was he wanted big linebackers. he didn't want sideline to sideline guys. He wanted thumpers. So he had guys, like the Mayo. Those guys were big, and that was his advantage to confuse the rookie quarterbacks because he was just blitzing these guys and hitting them. But yeah, I it's interesting to see. I want
Yeah.
to see how it pans out.
And like I was like I was saying the other day, TCU also welcomed Coach Prime to college football. That was a bar burner 3-point game that Colorado got out of there with. Saying I read that bull jive you wrote. Saying but now, Bill Belichick on Labor Day, I'm here for it. Looking at their schedule though, and this is why I said don't buy the stock because it's the schedule, So they go to UNC for that game. So we'll see what happens. But they get Abilene Christian afterwards. But then the rivalry game, the Frying Skillet, against SMU. But then they go to ASU the week after that. They go to Kansas State as well. Now, this is where it gets tricky, right? Because I don't have big hopes for West Virginia or BYU this year. But they're going on the road to BYU in that altitude. They're going to West Virginia, one of the raucous places. They're going to burn the couches. Rich Rod is back. And by the time they play West Virginia in this season, it might be after West Virginia started clicking. So yeah, so that game in Morgantown could be tough. So, I'm gonna call TCU best case scenario 9-3. I'm gonna give them 8-4, but I don't think they're going to play for the Big 12 title.
8-4. So you're kind of riding like the media love as well, then, unless the media love is 10-2.
No, there's media picking them to win the Big 12, to play in the Big 12 title game. Like, they're not ready for that. You know what I mean? Unless Josh Hoover. I mean, Josh Hoover's good enough to get them there, but I'm just not sure. They haven't been the same since that national title game. Nor should they be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was a shellacking.
That was beyond belt to ass. They got paddled to ass. Like
it changed how they picked teams.
Yeah, exactly. So then you got the team of the hour, right? Contender or pretender, Texas Tech. Now, this is my problem with Texas Tech, Mr. Logical, and this has nothing to do with football. My problem is we always talk about how the hunters become the hunted. Well, Texas Tech is now the hunted, but they didn't do shit to become the hunted. People talking about their talent, the transfer portal and all this stuff, like they got a target on their backs, I think. Joey Maguire, like I said, you got to get the results. I would say that Texas Tech is more Houston Texan than they are Buffalo Bill, if I had to break it down. So Baron Morton, quarterback back for another year, doesn't play well against good teams. He's one of those guys that, will light up West Virginia for 350 and then throw for 220 against Iowa State or something along the lines like that.
Yeah.
They brought in Quentin Joyner from USC, who was supposed to take over the running game now that Taj Brooks is in the NFL. Yeah, he tore his ACL the other day. So that's 7.6 yards per carry gone. They got Jacoby Williams replacing him. So on defense, two of the guys that I like that they got in the portal, David Bailey from Stanford and Romello Height from Georgia Tech. So I expect the defense to be a little bit better. Bryce Pollock coming in from Mississippi State, so on and so forth. They got a North Dakota State transfer coming in to play safety. And, of course, University of the Incarnate Word, Roy Alexander, 1,108 yards last year. Shout out to the Cardinals. So, look, Texas Tech, their schedule isn't friendly to them. They opened up with 3 gimmies, Arkansas, Pine Bluff, saying no shade, Residente, Kent State, Oregon State. But then they go to Utah. Go get some altitude. Get your bye week. Go to my sleeper, Houston. Go to Kansas. So, yeah, you're looking at 5-1 potentially. You're looking at a 5-1 start, in my opinion, more than likely. But then
they done play well against the good teams. So you got one loss being Utah.
Yeah. But then that's the problem. They go to Arizona State. They go to K-State. And then they close out the year at Morgantown. Like I said, it's one of those things where I think Rich Rod is going to have that thing humming by the end of the year. Pause. Where like they're going to start out slow. They're going to, it's going to take a while to learn his offense. But by the end of the season, I think West Virginia on the road is going to be an upset spot. So best case scenario, the transfers get it clicking. They go 10-2. They win the Big 12. Best case scenario. I don't see 11-1, but I'll go 10-2. Best case scenario. I'm looking at another 8-4 here. So a good season, but I don't know if that's the season you want with all the noise coming in and out of Lubbock.
I think anywhere from 8-4 to 8-4 to 10-2. I think it's a good season if the money is sustainable. If the money is predicated on winning the Big 12 and potential national championship, like if that's the expectation of the money, which I imagine that to some degree it is. But if the money is like, hey, we're willing to run this 2 or 3 years with this $1 million here, $1.5 million, $2 million here, if whoever's donating the money, if it's a sustainable pot of money, then I think it's a building block piece. And I don't think people look at it as a disappointment if they go 8-4. But if the expectation is win the Big 12 and get a spot in the final 12 and make some noise in the college football playoff, coming up short could, be damaging. But like I said, you can buy enough talent. It just, can your talent gel on the field? And that's the most important piece.
Yeah. Arkansas Pine Bluff. Shout out to the homie Deja Grimes, by the way. Shout out. So UCF, they got that old thing back. I talked about it earlier. Scott Frost, national title coach from 2017 when UCF shocked the world. And I mean, we used to make fun of them and talk about how they claiming a national title. And we got the story yesterday where Auburn was claiming national titles from like the 1910s and all that kind of stuff like that. So that 2017 year was a very long time ago. Since then, here's a one score stat for you. Scott Frost as a head coach at Nebraska, 5-22 in one score games. So
he did not look comfortable there as head coach at all.
Oh, and he's been shitting on him too ever since he left. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the alma mater. So you know what I mean? Like,
I think he just kind of felt like the leash was going to be a little longer, and it wasn't. Yeah, he didn't like. I remember watching those games. Like, he did not look like a guy who had control of his philosophy, the staff, the players. It just looked completely discombobulated for a team that's was a national power for as long as they were.
Right, and it was the Ohio State game. I think that sealed his fate that they lost at home because they had Ohio State right on the ropes and gave them a lifeline. You're welcome, Denver Broncos. Because UCF just gave you R.J. Harvey. He was the 6th leading rusher last year, 1,577 yards and 22 touchdowns. Out the door, Miles Montgomery coming in to take over. UCF with one starter on offense back, and I would love to give a shout out to Mackenzie Milton, the quarterback coach, former UCF and Florida State quarterback. So they got 3 quarterbacks that they're trying to decide between. I think it's going to be Taven Jackson from Indiana. I think he's going to get the starting nod. 15.2 yards per completion when he was last playing. The question that I have, as far as what they're doing, they went and got Alex Grinch as their defensive coordinator. And for those of you that don't remember who Alex Grinch is, he's the guy that was giving Lincoln Riley all those bad defenses. He went, started at Oklahoma, brought him over to USC, and they got some turnovers, every so often. But so this is the thing about that, right? So he's in Florida right now, Florida talent, speed, all that good stuff, right? But I said he was at USC. While he was at USC, he had 2 years of the 119th and the 106th defense in yards per game. And that's with Southern California talent. So
Yeah,
just saying, just
they were a
saying.
turnstile on defense.
And then their best defender ended up at Texas Tech too. So so they start off with their two gimmies, Jacksonville State and North Carolina A&T, but then they get Bill Belichick. They go to the Little Apple. Then they get a nice little 3-game stretch, maybe Kansas at Cincinnati and West Virginia. But then they go to Baylor. They get Houston in between going to Texas Tech, and they close at BYU. So the goal this season is a bowl game. This is the team I have finishing last in the Big 12. I got
UCF,
them at 3-9.
they have a lot of talent, a lot of yeah. They have a 6'6", 355-pound defensive tackle, Horace Lockett. You got to be able to do something with that. Like as a defensive coordinator, it's like a guy that big, teaching pad level.
Yeah, but you got the rest of them to go with them. You got the fully accessory kit.
He recruited Florida well. It's a lot of talent off of Florida. A lot of big guys that a couple of their quarterbacks are 6'2" to 6'4", over 200 pounds. You should be able to put this together. I mean, hell, their punter is 6'1", 197. So it's like you have the size, you have the talent, but is he a good enough coach? Is he more familiar being out of UCF, being somewhat of the underdog?
Well, the other part of that is when he was at UCF the first time, they were in the American. So they were playing your Tulsas and your East Carolinas and your Rice. You know what I mean? Like you ain't finding that over here.
You got a couple of those kind of. You got one or two of those maybe layups. Cincinnati, maybe Houston. Iowa State can't score, so like if
I don't know.
if you get to 27 points on Iowa State, you're probably solid.
I say wait till next year. You got your transfer portal. Can you get some of that Mickey Mouse money? Because they play in Orlando, so get some of that Mickey Mouse money and see what you can make shake after that. And then finally, Mr. Logical been waiting on pins and needles to talk some more about the Utah Utes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think this is Kyle Whittingham's last year. They already named Morgan Scully the coach in waiting. So I think that last year was probably the plan to be his last year, but it went so off the rails that he didn't want to leave on that.
Can't walk away like that, yeah.
Yeah, and then of course, they were relying on, and this is the problem, they were relying on Zach Wilson's little brother to get the job done.
He was not good.
Cam Rising, another injury. Now he's retired from football. Now they're bringing in Devin Dampier from New Mexico. He's bringing a wide receiver with him, but 12 touchdowns, 12 picks. The good news is he ran for 1,166 yards with 19 touchdowns. So, maybe this goes back to the days of Brian Johnson and Alex Smith, saying emphasizing the run that would put Utah on the map to begin with.
Run the ball, you throw it to tight ends were huge. And the Alex Smith era and then the Brian Johnson, you were hitting the tight end. They were big up front. I remember I stormed the field in a game in 2008, the year they went on to beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. Their offensive line with gigantic human beings. And I think they just maintain the line of scrimmage, win that way. They recruit well, very diverse team. They get a lot, like I said, they recruit Florida well, they recruit Texas well, California, the JUCO portal. A friend of mine, shout out to Q, a couple of his, players he coached at the youth level growing up and just different teams in the league. A few of those guys from Central Texas, like Dias, Abilene, Christian area. Those guys are on the Utah team. So it's like they're getting talent from, your football rich states. And on top of the fact that they are going to get first dibs for the most part at your better Utah players. Utah has a lot of prep football schools, a lot of, high end football talent. They keep a lot of it in house because Utah is a great place to play, great place to stay. The
Too bad
college,
they
the
couldn't keep
facilities
Jackson Dart.
couldn't keep Jackson Dart, but I think the glitz and glamour of California, that's where you lose them. A lot of Utah players end up at USC just because it's like, you dream of going to California. But yeah, I think their roster's solid. Like I said, I think the leadership's solid. They said getting the quarterback in the transfer portal is a dual threat, just keeping drives alive. Cam Rising was trying to do that, but the age and the injuries that he had, I, 2 years ago, I think he got injured trying to keep a play alive, going sideways, got pushed into the cooler. Baylor cut his hand. Then he tore his ACL later that year. He got injured in the Rose Bowl
Rose
game.
Bowl. Mm-hmm.
So he had so many compounding injuries. I think and he's a big guy too, 6'4", 6'5". You can't have too many injuries when you're that big because he wasn't like ultra athletic because he was so big already. So like he was like a Roethlisberger. He needed to be coming downhill and sliding and not trying to go sideways and avoiding guys. And I think that's where his injuries came from. But Dampier, smaller quarterback, in and out of the pocket, get the ball to your playmakers. Like I said, a lot of speed on the outside, a lot of size on the inside.
Yeah, I wish that they
So
still had Dorian Singer this year, because he would have been the perfect target. But, he's off to the NFL now. And, real quick shout out to these Irmo, South Carolina Little League All Stars. The sixth run comeback in the seventh inning, U.S. Championship game bound. Irmo, South Carolina, stand up.
shout out to you
Saying?
sports.
Yes, sir. But Utah did, he's going to be starting from scratch. He's got his receiver from New Mexico State. They lost 10 of their top 11 pass catchers off of last year's team. And you know what happened the last time we saw a quarterback come from New Mexico State? Diego Pavia smacking around Alabama, beat Auburn 2 years in a row in Jordan Hare with two different teams. How about that? So Mr. Logical, we gonna find out real quick. Because Utah opens up the season with Nico going out to the
With
Rose Bowl.
UCLA, like Nico hasn't really shown that he's the guy that's slicing and dicing up teams. He's a good quarterback. I think he had a lot of talent around him in Tennessee. But Utah just plays a relentless. They just play relentless up front. Linebackers, defensive linemen, very physical in the secondary. A lot of blitzing. So if he can handle that, then hats off to him. But I have a feeling that the UCLA Bruins will take their first loss on August 30th against the mighty Utah Utes.
Yeah, so I got them 3-0 heading into that Texas Tech game, but watch out for that Wyoming game in week 3. Wyoming is not a very good team, but hey, they just clipped Texas Tech 2 years ago or 3 years ago. They had Texas up in there when they came down here. I think it was not last year, but 2 years ago maybe. It was 10-10 at halftime. Going into the fourth quarter, still a 7-point game. So don't sleep on the Wyoming Cowboys. They might be the best team named Cowboy in this whole United States, if you know what I mean. You know what I'm saying? So then you got, at West Virginia. So that's going to be tough just from the travel standpoint, but I think they should be okay. They get Arizona State at home, Holy War. They go to Baylor, but they get Kansas State at home. So I like the way that the schedule sets up as far as who they get home and away. So I think Utah has a prime chance to win the Big 12, just off of their schedule, at the very least get into the title game.
Yes.
So then you got the West Virginia Mountaineers to wrap it up. Like I said, Rich Rod is back over from Jacksonville State. They have a total of 52 transfers. 52 transfers. A lot
That's
of them.
a lot. That's why you're saying that week 5 they should be rolling. That's a lot of new bodies. integrate into a system.
And I like Rich Rod having Pat White as the quarterback coach. How about that for a name from the past? So West Virginia is going to be good, just not this year. You know, they do have Jalen Henderson and Nico Markiel, in the backfield. So I mean at receiver, they lost C.J. Donaldson to Ohio State. But I think they might have got even better at running back with Jaheim White. So they got talent. They're going to clip somebody in Morgantown that they shouldn't just because it's Morgantown. But I'm looking at West Virginia at about 4-8 this year. And then next year they hit the portal, get some top-notch talent in there to run that offense. And then it could be anybody's world at that point. So, that's all your Big 12 teams. And look, before we get out of here, we got to pick a conference championship game. We got to pick a conference champion. So I'm going to just go on the record. I got Arizona State, the champion, not making it back to the conference title game. I got Iowa State, the runner-up from last year, not making it back to the Big 12 title game. I was so tempted to put Texas Tech into the Big 12 title game, but I just can't do it. So give me Kansas State over Utah in the Big 12 championship game.
Yeah, give me Utah over Arizona State and the Big 12, and go ahead and send Utah to the college football playoff. Go
All right.
Utes.
Last question, Mr. Logical, before we get out of here. Is there any possibility that the Big 12 gets 2 teams into the playoff?
No. No, because that would work. The only way that happens is if you get an 11-1 Arizona State or 11, like one team has to come into that game, because I don't think they're going to be undefeated, because I think the balance of the parity of the conference, I think BYU's talent and Kansas talent and Utah talent and I think it's on par. So each one of these teams are going to clip each other up at some point. 28-27 wins somewhere, 31-30 wins somewhere place else. I think it's going to be a lot of close games. So I doubt that you're going to end up with the team that gets there 12-0. A 10-2, 11-1 playing against a 9-3, and then the 9-3 team wins in a close one. Say Utah comes in 9-3, Arizona State comes in 10-2, and they both leave the game 10-3, maybe. But 11-1, 9-3, and then they leave 11-2 and 10-3. The champion gets in, and I think the 11-2 team gets in. But it's hard for me to find 11 wins for these teams, because the rivalries are there, the locale is there. They have more regional, like Colorado, Utah, it's a border war. Then you have Kansas State, Kansas. So you just have these long-standing bitter rivalries where I think it just means more. So the no, for instance, not necessarily just Big 12 in general, but just Kansas State beating Kansas.
Well, no,
is a big deal.
I was doing that because of the whole being more thing.
Yeah, because I think Kansas State beating Kansas means a lot. Georgia Tech, I mean, listen, Arkansas can want to beat Alabama all they want, but Alabama, Georgia, LSU, they've been the class of the SEC for years. It's a lot of teams that say it means more. Yeah, it means more because the top team tends to compete for the championship. But Mississippi State is not crossing the border and beating LSU in a shocker often. It just doesn't happen. Whereas I think that Kansas State game happens. I think BYU, Utah, they could both be 0-11 and play the 12th game, and it would be the best 52-48 game you've ever seen in your life, because because it's regionally, it matters a little bit more.
See, we ain't even talking about the NFL, and you still trying to call Dak Prescott a choker.
Listen, I didn't say anything about Dak Prescott. I'm just talking about Mississippi State. Chris Jones went there too. He has some Super Bowl rings.
I heard Dak Prescott. That's what I heard.
Listen, I rock with Dak Prescott.
But
anyway, too bad he has to play for Jerry Jones.
We'll be back on Friday, y'all, where it really just means more. The SEC, the Southeastern Conference, can they get back into the national title ring? Because they went on their long streak.
In there.
They went on their long streak, and now the Big Ten has won the last 2 national titles. And I think, if I remember correctly, the last Big 12 team to win the national title was 2000. I want to say that was Oklahoma. Yeah, unfortunately, they
was
beat
it. I don't know if that was two. I don't think that was 2000. I think that was Florida State won the game that was played in 2000, the 99 season. I think that was Florida State over Virginia Tech.
Oh, I guess actually I I forgot all about. How did I forget about Vince Young? That Texas USC game was the last one. So I didn't even need to bring up 13-2 for no reason. But I did it. But yeah, we'll be back on Friday, y'all. We love y'all. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for the engagement as always. He is the world famous, world renowned, cool, calm, and collected. Telling you not to bring feelings to fact fights.
Don't do it.
He is Mr. Logical, and I am your unorthodox statistician. I do believe in Joe Hendry. I am 25. See you Friday. Like, review, subscribe, share, rate, do all the free things. Do all the good things. Liquid Death's on me. Drink up, y'all. Peace.